Welcome to my channel. This is the scariest thing I've ever experienced. I was home alone in my apartment, and I heard someone knocking very lightly on my door. Now, this is scary enough on its own because I live alone, and I wasn't expecting anyone over. But what really freaked me out was that I could hear myself knocking on the door from outside. It sounded like I was right on the other side of the door, knocking as if I was trying to let myself into the apartment. It was my exact knock. And as you might expect, this made absolutely no sense whatsoever. I had just come home about 30 minutes prior, and I double-checked that I had locked the door behind me when I came in. I even looked through the peephole, and there was no one there at all, so who could be knocking on my door? It's important to note that this isn't some old apartment building or anything like that. It's fairly new construction. All of the doors have those nice modern doorbells, and the walls are pretty thin. So if anyone was on the other side of the door, I should have been able to hear them through the walls. And not only that, but the door itself has an electronic deadbolt. To get through that outer layer of protection, someone would have to either brute force it open or know the PIN code to disable it. The idea that someone knew my exact knock and was standing on the other side of my door was unsettling to say the least. I waited a few minutes to see if it happened again, and sure enough, I heard another knock. Again, it sounded exactly like me, and I looked again through the peephole, but there was still nothing there. At this point, I started to think that maybe I was going crazy. I mean, how else would you explain hearing yourself knock from the other side of the door when you re on the only side where you know the door is locked? I decided to just ignore it and pretend that I hadn't heard anything. Surely whatever it was would eventually go away. So I turned off the lights and went into my bedroom to watch some TV. But within a couple of minutes, I heard yet another knock. This time it was louder and more insistent than before. Now it definitely sounded like someone was on the other side of the door trying to get my attention. I hesitated for a moment, but ultimately decided to open the door to check. As I slowly opened it up, I told myself that it was probably nothing. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing, or perhaps it was just some trick of the acoustics in the apartment building. I didn't want to believe that someone was out there, but a small part of me couldn't help but wonder. When I opened the door, however, I was met with a sight that made me slam it shut and lock it again. There was no one there at all. On one side of the door was my apartment, and on the other side was the wall. There was no doorknob on that side, because it was a solid wall, which meant that the only way to get into my apartment was through the front door. Yet I had clearly heard someone knocking from beyond the wall, which made absolutely no sense whatsoever. I triple-checked that the door was locked, and then proceeded to hide in my bedroom under the covers for the rest of the night. As the sun began to rise, I started to calm down a bit, and I decided to look outside from my window to see if I could spot anything suspicious. That was when I noticed a single footprint on my welcome mat. Now, this was by far the weirdest part of the whole ordeal, because I knew that I had swept my welcome mat the day before. The fact that there was now a perfectly normal human footprint on it meant that someone had recently been outside of my door. And since I knew that I was the only person with a key to my apartment, that meant that whoever had left that footprint must have gotten in somehow. At this point, fear gave way to anger, and I immediately began searching for signs of forced entry. I checked the windows, and they were all securely locked and showed no signs of being tampered with. Then I walked back to my door and took a closer look at the deadbolt. Sure enough, I saw some small scratches on the doorframe, as though someone had tried to force it open. Apparently, they had ungiven up after my first knock, and had instead tried to brute force their way in. But thankfully, they weren't strong enough to break through the deadbolt. So I had managed to scare them off without even knowing that it had happened. After finding this evidence, I felt much better knowing that I was safe. Whatever had happened, it seemed to be over for now, and I could move on with my day. I went downstairs to get the mail, and while I was gone, I decided to put my phone on silent so that I wouldn't get any distractions. When I returned, I found a voicemail from my neighbor. I played it, and it was her letting me know that she had seen someone trying to get into my apartment last night around midnight. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, and just assumed that I had been expecting someone, so she hadn't said anything until now. Upon hearing this, I immediately became worried again. Someone had broken into my apartment while I was out. Was that why my phone had mysteriously died the other day? And what if they had done some damage while I wasn't looking? And I quickly searched the apartment again to make sure everything was okay, but I couldn't find anything out of place. My laptop was still in the same spot, and all of my things were exactly where I had left them. But that didn't necessarily mean that nothing had happened. After all, they would have had plenty of time to steal something and leave without me noticing. The whole situation was extremely strange, and I could understand how someone could try to break into my apartment twice in the same day. It really made me question everything I thought I knew about safety and security. How could I have been so close to danger and not even known it? What would I have done if they had actually gotten inside? I began to worry that my apartment was unsafe anymore, and that I needed to take action to protect myself. But what could I possibly do? I wasn't sure where to start. That's when I remembered that my neighbor had mentioned seeing someone trying to get into my apartment, so I decided to ask her if she knew anything else. Perhaps she had seen something suspicious around the time that I had heard the knocking. I went over to her apartment, and she was kind enough to answer all of my questions. She told me that she had seen a man trying to get into my apartment twice, once around midnight and again around 4 a.m. He had been dressed in all black and was wearing a hoodie, which made it hard to see his face. She also mentioned that she had seen him lurking around the building earlier in the day, but she didn't think anything of it at the time. With this new information, I began to feel a sense of relief, knowing that whatever had happened, it seemed to be over for now, and hopefully the person responsible would move on to easier targets. However, I couldn't help but wonder who this person was and what their intentions had been. Had they been planning to rob me? Or was there something more sinister behind their actions? I knew that I needed to take steps to ensure my safety and the safety of those around me. So I decided to invest in a home security system. I contacted a local company and they installed cameras around my apartment. In addition to the cameras, I also installed a motion sensor light outside of my door. This way, if anyone tried to approach my door in the middle of the night, I would be alerted. I continued to take precautions by keeping my doors locked at all times and never opening the door to strangers. I also began carrying a self-defense spray and took classes to learn how to defend myself if necessary. As the days turned into weeks, the memory of that terrifying experience began to fade. The home security system provided me with a sense of comfort, and I felt confident that I was prepared for any future incidents. However, every time I heard a knock on the door, my heart would race, and I couldn't help but wonder if it was him. Despite the lingering fear, I knew that I had taken the necessary steps to protect myself, and that was enough for me to move forward with my life. If you enjoyed this story, then be sure to share it with your friends. You can also subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.